What's up, guys? This is going to be the full card breakdown for UFC Fight Night Woodley versus Burns. It's coming up Saturday, 6 o'clock start time for the prelims. Another decent card. Not as good as the last two, as far as implications on the rankings go, but still solid as far as matchups. I think there's going to be a lot of good fights, probably some close ones, a decent amount of decisions, but at the same time, I think there'll be some wars. So, I'm looking forward to it. There are some betting opportunities on this card as well as next week, so you might even want to pair up some of the options now that we have a bunch of cards to bet on. So taking your most confident pick on each of the cards, doing a parlay like that, or your most confident two picks on each if you want to get a little bit more risky with it. But we'll talk about a few of those options as well. So first fight of the night, we got Chris Gutierrez against Vince Morales. This could be a really good fight. So Morales is going to bring the fight, and Gutierrez is going to have the skill advantage. This could be really close, and one of those fights where, in the eyes of the public, it's a clear winner, but there's a robbery. Anytime it goes to the cards now, I almost feel like picking the opposite unless it's crystal clear who picked it up. So I'm going to go with Chris Gutierrez by decision. Not interested in a bet, and, the potential to be a really good fight. So next up, we got Kenney and Luis Smolka. So real quick on Smolka, when he came in, I was impressed. Went on a 5-1 tear, I think, to start out his career in the UFC. Then he had about 4 or 5 really bad performances, and then came back now on another 5-1 stretch. But not really notable fights or notable opponents. So this is going to be a big step up for him as far as recent competition goes. Kenney's a tough guy coming off that loss to Merab. He's going to be really hungry for the win here, and I think he can probably get it done against Smolka. One thing I did notice is the finish is up over 4-1, and with him sitting at 1.36, somewhere around there. Even as a parlay option, I think it's a decent leg, especially if you're looking at some of the options off of the other cards. So whether you want to look at a prop or if you just want to pair him up as a parlay option. And like I said, you put the bigger money on the safer bet. So if you're going to parlay him with another fighter that you're really confident with, put the big money there, and then a small shot on the prop, right? Guys that like to have plays on the entire card, what I like to say is, if you're going to do that anyway, put the big money on your confident plays, and then 10-20 bucks here and there is whatever, but don't really affect your bankroll trying to put money everywhere, because it doesn't work out. But everybody has their own style, and it's just process of elimination of what does and doesn't work. Always go with your gut as well. I wanted to mention that before I go too much farther. For the most part, I think a lot of people watch these videos just to get a perspective or to see if people agree with what they're saying or if they should pull the trigger on their bets or whatever, right? Some people want DraftKings lineups and they just want the picks. Some people want, the bet. Regardless, it's just to get a perspective. And if, you're on, say, Tim Elliot in the next fight, and you're considering, putting him in a lineup or betting on him, and then I come and say Royval, I wouldn't recommend changing that pick. But, if I were to come and say Tim Elliot is going to get it done by TKO, you have that same view, we both, think the fight's going to go that way, that would be a time when it would be good to take advantage of, somebody else's perspective or pick, right? But never go against your gut, because, there's nothing worse than you calling it right and, changing it for somebody else's opinion, and it will happen. So, avoid doing that. But next up, we got Tim Elliot and Brandon Royval. So, the smart pick here, based on experience and, just time in the cage. He's fought all the highest level, Demetrius Johnson title fight, right? I do lean towards Elliot, but at the same time, he's been really disappointing in a lot of fights, especially in his last two. So really hesitant, definitely not interested in a bet. No value there at all. So, I'm staying away from it. I'm going to go with Tim Elliot by decision. But, yeah, it's tough to go with Tim at this point in his career. I used to really think that he was skilled when he had that performance against, way back against, Demetrius Johnson. I had a lot different opinion of him. But, like I said, his last couple of performances did change that a little bit. I'm going to take him by decision, not interested in a bet. Next up, we got Jamahal Hill and Klidson Abreau. So, initially when I saw the line, I did think it was a bit off. Just because in some of the tape that I watched, looking at Hill in his last fight, and it led me to pick against him. He was taken down pretty easily in one of the fights and almost submitted. But, I think he was saved by the bell against an opponent that was definitely not UFC level. So unless he's, really worked on that, and I'm sure he has, right? It's likely that, he might have filled that hole in his game. But if not, he's going to have a hard time with Abreau. Not necessarily a guy that's going to be hungry for a takedown. Usually he's content to stay on the feet. But in this case, that wouldn't be a good look because of the, reach advantage, probably a clear power advantage, and, it just wouldn't be smart to mix it up on the feet. So I'm going to go with Abreau to get the takedown and get the submission here, or at least, grind him out against the cage and make it a boring fight. So I will take Abreau, but not interested in a bet there. So next up, we got Daniel Rodriquez and Gabriel Green. Not a fight I'm overly looking forward to, but I mean, it is interesting to see, or it will be interesting to see what Daniel Rodriquez is going to look like, after that really good performance against Tim Means, where he got the finish. We'll see how it goes for Rodriquez. I did like what I saw in the first performance, and I'm going to pick him again here to get it done. I'll say by TKO in the first round. Next up, we got Caitlin Chookagian and Antonina Shevchenko. Now, this is the first bet. I put a bet on Chookagian at 2.2. Reason being, with Antonina, I remember in her first fight, and this really stood out because I thought that she would get the win. I really was irritated just watching Roxanne Modafferi. When she got a hold of Antonina, it wasn't good. Antonina looked over at her sister as soon as Roxanne got a hold of her and basically had a look of despair, like, what the fuck am I going to do, Whenever you see something like that, it's a huge red flag. It stands out in my mind, and it's going to lead me to believe that, Caitlin is going to probably go for the grappling approach here, probably mix it up on the feet a little bit, walk her down, try to make it a high-paced fight, tire her out, and get the takedown midway through the fight. So I'm going to go with Caitlin Chookagian to get it done by decision. Could be another really good fight, though. Next up, we got Mackenzie Dern and Hannah Cifers. So here's another fight that I think is interesting. So Mackenzie Dern hasn't fought the highest level competition outside of Ribas in her last fight. And, we saw what happened there. Ribas put on a striking clinic, right? So I'm not impressed with Mackenzie Dern. Now, of course, she has a really high-level jiu-jitsu. She can get if she gets the takedown, it's going to be, a pretty quick night. Kind of like that Jacare, Damian Maia, level jiu-jitsu, as a female 115, right? So Hannah Cifers is a strong girl, though. Her game plan here is going to be to strike and avoid that takedown. 4-1 is crazy. Mackenzie Dern came into the UFC, missed weight by 7 pounds. Clearly shows that she doesn't have the heart or doesn't give a shit. Now, since she's had the baby, apparently the weight's naturally come off. It makes sense. She's going to be more active, especially once the baby's up and moving and things like that. So I don't know that weight's going to be an issue for her here, but I don't like those 4-1 odds. Now, I don't like a big shot on it because Hannah Cifers isn't the greatest, right? But she doesn't warrant 4-1 plus. At most, 2.5-1, I would say. Could be accurate. Now, if she comes in this performance, gets a hold of Cifers and gets a quick submission, I'll be really impressed because Cifers is tough. In her last outing, she took on Angela Hill, who's obviously a threat at the moment, right? I thought she beat Claudia Gadelha. It was a close fight. Definitely not a robbery, in my opinion, but I thought she did enough to beat Claudia. And, Cifers, before it went to the mat, was doing all right. So I'm going to go with Hannah Cifers. I think the line's off. And potentially a small shot. I think, especially if she gets things going, if you notice in the first round that, Mackenzie misses that first or second takedown, that's something to, be wary of. So it might even be better to hold off on the live bet, or for the live bet, I should say, until we see that first takedown attempt. But I'm going to be picking Hannah Cifers to get it done either by TKO or more likely decision, but, possibly could even get the finish. Next up, Roosevelt Roberts and Brock Weaver. So, I actually thought Brock Weaver was decent as far as, his stand-up. Not a whole lot as far as groundwork to look at until his last fight. That was a red flag for me. Right away, I was regretting the pick. As soon as, we saw that first takedown, of course, the illegal knee got him the win. But, anybody who had him in a parlay, because he was a big favorite in that fight as well, got lucky that day, because he definitely was on his way to an L, or it looked like it. Basically being mauled there before that illegal knee. So I'm going to go with Roosevelt Roberts, just because he's a talented guy. I was pretty high on him coming into the UFC. I think he has a lot of potential. He's been put in there against some high-level competition, Vince Pichel, and, had a good account of himself, or showed a good account of himself. So I'd have to go with Roosevelt Roberts. I would say the line's a bit off, though. Not interested in a bet, of course, straight. I mean, I do think he's in a lot of parlays because of the number, dropping from, I think it was probably 1.35 down to, about 1.25 now, actually. So line's off there, but I like Roosevelt Roberts to get it done. Next up, we got Billy Quarantillo and Spike Carlyle. Spike Carlyle came out and, a really good performance in his last fight. I wasn't expecting that first round knockout over a guy who's, considered a pretty good striker. So, really good first outing for Carlyle. Looks like he's really explosive, some decent power, and he'll go for the kill. So he's a threat for sure. But Billy Quarantillo, he's going to look for the pressure as well. It's going to be a really good fight. I'm looking forward to this one. I'm going to take Quarantillo by decision, but I think this could be, potentially fight of the night. And, if Spike Carlyle comes out and get another finish here, it's going to be, big for him. Next up, we got Blagoy Ivanov and Augusto Sakai. So this isn't the most exciting fight. I mean, Sakai and Ivanov had some pretty boring fights, especially Ivanov, right? He's really known for kind of just staying on the back foot and scoring when his opponents come in. But he's good at it. I mean, he has a good record, fought some high-level competition in the UFC, and definitely picked up some wins that people didn't think that he would get. I'm going to pick him here to win by decision, and a decent live bet opportunity here as well. Some of these fights, or a lot of the ones that, when I'm looking at the fights, prior to the event, a lot of the ones that I've been thinking are going to be good for live betting have ended up being really good for live betting. As far as, a couple of the different props and things like that, I don't think the main event's going to go the distance. We'll talk about that in a minute. I think it's likely that one, will see a finish. I think it's likely that we see the over, at least over 1.5 on Ivanov and Sakai. It's likely that we could see finishes. So the fight not to go the distance against Roosevelt Roberts. What was the other one I was looking at? Even Kenney, like I said, at the 4-1 number, and the over on Chookagian and Shevchenko. So there's a couple over-under options as well as far as possible parlay options. But keep them small, right? 2 or 3 legs at the most is what I recommend. Of course, everybody has their own style. But we'll get into the main event, Tyrone Woodley and Gilbert Burns. Really good fight here. Hard for me to pick. I've been back and forth. I think the speed and the power has definitely got to go to Woodley. With him being out for a while now, though, definitely not a good thing. While Gilbert's been as active as he has, he's going to be confident. And fighters like Gilbert that wing bombs are always dangerous, right? We've seen Tyrone Woodley get caught as far back as Nate Marquardt in Strikeforce put him out, right? So he can be knocked out, and that's definitely a threat. I do think he's going to be really hungry in this fight, and I do think he's going to look to pull the trigger, right? I think watching back that fight with Kamaru Usman, he's probably, really disappointed in himself, was really gun-shy, and I think he's going to look to make a statement in this fight. I'm going to take Tyrone Woodley by TKO. I don't underestimate Gilbert Burns. I'm not interested in a bet on Woodley. So as far as the bets, we'll go through that real quick. So if we're looking at a parlay option, maybe Kenney and Roosevelt Roberts would have been a good option, back when the line was a little bit better. You know, Casey Kenney paired up with, who do we have next week? There's a couple names from next week. But let's say, you know, your favorite or your most confident pick from next week paired up with Kenney. I do like him pretty heavily for the win. And like I said, that 4-1 for the finish is decent as well. Also, Caitlin Chookagian at 2.2 was another bet. Small shot on Hannah Cifers just because the line's off. And then again for props, main event not to go the distance. Over on Chookagian and Shevchenko. And then, I mean, and the 4-1 there, like I said, with Kenney. I mentioned that a few times. And even Daniel Rodriquez and Gabriel Green, that's likely to see a finish as well. So there's a few options there. Next week, again, there is a couple. I think there's actually maybe 3 bets for next week, pre-fight bets. So let me know who you guys have. I'll wrap it up here. I appreciate you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.